hop on. Okay, so thank you everyone for joining us for our weekly lecture series at EducationUSA. For those who don't know, at EducationUSA Ukraine, we have weekly lectures on different topics related to US higher education at 5 p.m. On Thursdays, and usually these take place at America House, but of course in the given situation, we're doing everything online nowadays. But for those who don't know what EducationUSA is, we are an official network of the U.S. State Department that promotes U.S. higher education abroad and helps students through the application process. So we're really here to be your source for information on opportunities to study in the U.S. and answer any questions that you have. And we have the really wonderful opportunity today to be joined by a Ukrainian alumna who has gone through the process of applying to universities, was clearly incredibly successful, and has had the experience of studying in the US. So thank you, Viktoria Barbaniuk, for joining us today. And she is going to talk about MPA programs, Master of Public Administration programs in the US, particularly at Columbia University. So Victoria's got a presentation, but we hope that this can be a lovely interactive discussion. So please feel free to ask questions, put your questions into the chat box, and we will turn to them after Victoria has given her presentation. And of course, if you have longer questions or something you need to explain, you can raise your hand virtually and we'll turn on your microphone. So with that, I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to Victoria.
So hi everyone, it's nice for you to join us today to talk a little bit more about the public administration programs. I'm gonna go ahead and start the presentation for everyone, and just let me know, can everyone see this? Okay.
Yes, looks great for me anyway.
Okay, so so we're going to talk today about the Master of Public Administration programs. I was thinking that the preliminary schedule can be, I'll give you a little bit of an intro about myself, then we can talk about the MPA programs in general, about how to apply and finance your education and what to do once you're there. And then after that, I highly encourage you to ask questions because I cannot anticipate what kind of information you would want to hear, so it'd be useful if you ask questions. So this is a little bit about myself. This is just, I feel like whenever I'm getting presentation, it's good for me to know who I'm talking to and who's given the information. So I studied at Columbia University at SIPA, School of International Public Affairs. I finished this May, last May 2019. Before that, I studied at Taras Shevchenko National University. I did my bachelor's in international relations. Right now, I work for CIVITTA, which is a management consulting firm that has office here in Ukraine, but is also present in 15 countries throughout Central and Eastern Europe. And before coming to SIPA, I had a very diverse background. So I worked for Teach for Ukraine, which is an educational organization. And for those of you who might have heard about Teach for America or similar organization, this is basically the group. I also worked for the Ministry of Finance of Ukraine for some time, for the Kyiv Post, and interned at Canada's House of Commons. Whoever was ever or is planning to be a part of Canada-Ukraine parliamentary program, I'm also happy to answer any questions after this presentation about this. So with that, my background before applying to the MPA was very different. At Kyiv Post, which is a media organization, one of the probably the only English language publication, not the only one, but certainly those representing the independent media in Ukraine. So that was more on the business side. I did organize different events and worked for numerous projects. So that was a media, more like private sector experience. Then I had a chance to work both at the Ministry of Finance here in Ukraine, which is government sector, and also back in Canada. And then also I did work for Teach for Ukraine, which is an NGO. So with that kind of different experience, that was, I think, the thing that motivated me to apply for the programs, to sort of understand what is the sphere where I want to work and contribute more, the skills that I want to get, and in general sort of upgrade from understanding things on a more let's say intuitive level to being able to justify the decisions I made by understanding more about the evidence that is behind any decisions. So that sort of motivated me to apply to study in the US. So if we talk about the public administration programs, I think in general, the target group for this kind of programs is people with 2 or more years of experience, and there is a reason for that. I think it's sort of, maybe not anymore, but it certainly used to be when I was applying for MPA programs, or in general applying for the master's degree, that it's better to do this straight after your undergraduate degree, which I don't believe in. I think it's still useful after your 4 years studying in a Ukrainian university or somewhere else. You kind of get out there and try yourself in different fields and in different spheres of study that you find interesting, because without actually doing stuff, it's very difficult to understand whether you like it or not, and what sort of skills you need to further upgrade in your career. So I would say that certainly at a program where I studied, and for different kind of reasons, 2 or more years of experience is usually a good benchmark. So about the skills, my motivation of applying to the grad school was, again, I had a very diverse experience and I was not quite sure where I wanted to be. And so this was one thing. Another thing is I did want to get more quantitative skills to be able to make more evidence-based decisions and find more evidence-based solutions to different sort of problems that I was facing as part of different organizations and institutions, to understand more about the policies. So in Ukrainian language, I think policies and politics is pretty much the same, but it's not. So I think understanding that kind of distinguishing feature was also very important for me. And then of course, getting more managerial skills. And then again, I think like often like management skills and everything else, it's like a buzzword whenever you hear people applying for the MPA programs. But then again, in this case, it's very difficult to learn more about management without having a prior experience to reflect upon. So then again, previous work experience does come handy when you are already in the university trying to get those skills and kind of understand what you want to do. Another thing was when I was applying to SIPA and to other MPA programs, I wanted to specifically concentrate more on understanding a specific field, and for me that was urban social policy. So first, how is everything organized on a local level, so specifically in cities and municipalities, and also understanding sort of different social policy dimensions. So for me, that was education. And then once I got into SIPA, that turned out to be many other things that I was interested in. In terms of the age, here I wrote that it's usually 27, 32 years old. I mean, it really depends on the program, on the university that you're applying to. But again, mostly those are people who would already come there with some prior experience, if not a full-time experience working somewhere, then different sort of internships that they did. Another question that I think arises a lot when you're applying, you'll see that there are different programs in different universities. Some that are called Master of Public Policy, others are Master of Public Administration or Master of Public Affairs. I'm still debating as to what's the difference between these programs, but I think it also very much depends on the university. So for instance, like if we talk about the HKS, from what I remember, their MPP program is the 2-year program versus their MPA program is more of an executive MPA. I think it's 1 year or something like this. So people say that sometimes public policy programs are more quantitative heavy and MPA programs are more about managerial skills. But again, I wouldn't have a very specific distinction about them because it very much depends on the university. And if you see, for instance, like in Brown University in Watson School, their MPA program is Master of Public Affairs program. It's 1-year program, so it's very different. So whenever you're applying, I think the idea here is to not be drawn to a specific name unless there is a reason for that, but actually to understand what's behind the program because it very much differs and it's not the same for all of the universities out there. So when it comes to the duration and curriculum, there are various programs. There are 1-year and 2-year programs for MPA and MPP. So for instance, out of those that I applied to or that just like I know about would be the Maxwell School at Syracuse. They have a 1-year program. At Brown University, they also have a 1-year program. SIPA, the one where I studied, is a 2-year, same as Harris School, HKS, and other programs. I think here, because a lot of people ask, like, what's the difference? And is there a specific reason to apply for either a 1-year or 2-year program? And again, it depends. The idea in general is that even if you choose to do to study abroad in the US for MPA or MPP, you still should understand that this is an opportunity cost either way. Because you are leaving Ukraine for 1 or 2 years, you're basically withdrawing yourself from your career right now, and you're spending this time investing in your new skills and new experience. So for some people, it's whenever they consider programs financially, sometimes people choose 1-year programs because again, it's less expensive, and then it's sort of a more accelerated way to get the skills that you need. For me, I think that I don't regret taking a 2-year program because it's certainly enough time to adjust yourself to the new environment, to the new way of studying, because it's certainly different from Ukrainian universities, and at the same time get the most out of the program. But then again, it's very much personal, and there are people who, again, it's an opportunity cost, so it's up for you to decide. From what I know though, is that 1-year programs sometimes are more fast-paced and are much more intensive, just because you'll see in the next slide, the curriculum is sort of not the same, but certainly has several similar elements. And so if you want to finish the program in 1 year, you certainly have to take a much faster pace. So about the core curriculum, usually if you Google, or like in general, if you're interested in any of the MPA and MPP programs in the US, you'll see that there is still a core curriculum behind them that is very much similar, and it doesn't matter if this is HKS, Maxwell, Chicago, Harris, or some other schools. So this I will talk about later. Some of the universities have specific concentrations, specializations, areas of study. So those would be a specific topical classes that you can take, having already a background in a core curriculum. Another thing to consider is that usually 2-year programs especially have internships as part of the core requirement. So in order to graduate, you have to have an internship either in the summer or throughout the semester, that depends. So I think this is also what differ those kind of programs from other programs, because there is a very much practical element to everything that you do. And the other thing to consider is, especially if you have a very specific sort of concentration or specialization in mind, or you want to get a different experience studying in 2 different universities or between different schools in the same university. Most of the programs that I've seen have dual degree programs. So the way it works is, for instance, Columbia had partnership with Sciences Po in Paris, with LSE in London, so people can take classes both at Columbia and at LSE, for instance, and graduate from both of the schools. Or, for instance, again, I think those were the programs that Columbia had, but it's not just Columbia thing. It actually exists in most of the schools out there, that you can have, for instance, a dual degree MBA, MPA, or MBA and social studies, something like that. So that's another thing to consider whenever you're looking for those sort of programs. But I think the one thing that you should take into account is that usually those programs might be more expensive, just because some of them would require more than 2 years of studying, and some of them in general, because you still will be sharing this time between the 2 universities, so the tuition will differ depending on what are those universities. And about career opportunities, pretty much after graduating from the MPA degree, you can work anywhere. Out of my friends and people that I know who graduated from similar programs, a lot of people go there with sort of in mind working in the public sector, and that can be different, either central government, local government, different sort of international organizations, or the nonprofit. But then a lot of people, and it very much depends from the program, end up also in the private sector. From the recent statistics that I've seen from SIPA, most of the graduates work in public sector, in private sector. And again, this can be different. Either people become the sole entrepreneurs, or they work in consulting, banking, any sort of private sector industry that you can imagine. And the reason behind that is because MPA programs, apart from having some specializations or concentrations, they do give you sort of basic set of skills that you will need to succeed. So if we talk about quantitative analysis or something, you may not become a data scientist, but the idea is that if someone brings you a part of the research and that contains some quantitative analysis behind this, you should be able to understand whether this was done correctly or not, and you should be able to distinguish the quality of that deliverable or something that someone gives you. So those are sort of the universal skills that you get. And if I talk specifically about the curriculum, I don't know if Lean had a chance to join us out of the participants, but this was done just because those were like one of the also 2 schools that I was applying. So I sort of wanted to show you what the curriculum to expect at an MPA MPP program. If you go to any program that exists out there, you'll see that there's going to be subjects that kind of fall into one of these categories. So the first one is policy making. You'll probably have some classes that would be explaining more about sort of what is understood behind the policy making, how decisions are made, what are the factors to consider, what are the stakeholders that you should consider in different set of scenarios. So for SIPA, for instance, that was the class called Politics of Policymaking, and you could choose either do it in comparative politics on more sort of American institutions, especially for those who are planning to stay in the US. So if you look at the similar program at Syracuse University, again, this is my interpretation of how it falls into different categories, so don't take it as given. But for instance, they have something called Public Affairs Colloquium and Public Administration. and democracy. The program is called, yeah. So then another important thing is economics. So again, this is different in different schools and you can choose different sort of classes. But I think the basis, and most schools have this in their core curriculum, is the understanding of economics. Micro, macro, it's called different. Sometimes it's just the economics with different sort of classes behind this. But this certainly would be in your curriculum. Another is the quantitative analysis, so statistics, econometrics, that usually falls under this. Again, the idea is that whatever decisions you make in life, in either in public, private, nonprofit sector, that should be backed up by some evidence, some analysis, and some sort of data behind this. So for you to do that, you do have to have a basic understanding about those sort of things. So at SIPA, we had Quant 1 as a requirement. So that would be an introduction to quantitative analysis. And then we had different sort of quantitative analysis 2, 3, quantitative analysis for education sector, something like this. If people wanted to go deeper and have more skills in that area. Another thing is management. I think in every public administration degree program, you'll have classes on management. So here for SIPA, I included only 2, but actually you can choose out of 8 in the core curriculum. This is excluding the elective courses that you can take. And for instance, similar in Syracuse, they have something called public organizations and management. So I would assume those would be those basics of management. And again, I think my advice, for the reason, again, I mentioned that it would be good to have some experience before applying to MPA, MPP programs, is because mostly management classes, while they do give you some frameworks and some ideas of how decisions are made and what some of the basics of management, without having a prior experience to reflect upon, I don't think that you remember as much from the classes and you take as much. So I think management for me, the one of the required classes that we had was more of an opportunity to reflect on my previous work experience and understand how the decisions that I made, or the organizational culture in places where I worked, how did it fall into all of these frameworks and kind of metrics that they would teach you. Another class would be financial management. So this is anything from accounting to budgeting, either for nonprofits or for government. At SIPA, they did try to have different financial management courses offerings just to feed basically the interest of people, because there are people who came there specifically wanted to work in nonprofit sectors, so they could, for instance, choose nonprofit financial management. Those people who want to specifically work in government, they had a class on budgeting and financial management for government. Again, accounting was, I mean, honestly, a class everyone I think should take at some point, but like that was also an option. And you can see that similar in Syracuse, they have public budgeting as one of the required classes. Again, because if you think about any place that you work in, you have to deal with this in one way or another. So this is also what is considered one of the basic skills that you should take from your degree for the MPA program. Another thing here I have is a Capstone Workshop. So again, it's called differently in different programs and different university, but the basic idea is that you actually get a practical experience working with the client on a real problem. So at SIPA, they had tons of different projects that you could work on. You could choose them, you could apply to different projects, and it's sort of a very great experience to first be exposed to real clients, to real problems, and at the same time working in a team with different people. So again, I assume it happens differently for different schools, but at SIPA, you didn't choose the people that you were working with. So you sort of applied because you liked the project. And then it's a great experience to actually be immersed in the environment where you can work with people from different backgrounds, from different places in the world, and basically that's that practical aspect of the program that is very valuable. For instance, my capstone workshop was for the 125th Street in Harlem, for their business improvement district, and that was an interesting experience because basically the whole idea was how do you respond to a changing environment on that street that used to be very much commercial, but now you have a lot of businesses coming in. So the idea was how do you preserve the cultural diversity and cultural significance of that street, but at the same time not precluding the business to come in and sort of not basically responding to it in a way that is respectful to the community that lives there, and at the same time business-wise smart. Another is internship. As I mentioned, internship is part of, sometimes it's not in the core curriculum, and for some programs it's not a required sort of course to graduate, but I would assume that any program, either required or not, does have internship as part of the experience. So at SIPA, it was a requirement to graduate. I think the only way you could get out of internship was if you had, I think, 5-7 years of experience. But I mean, again, this is not about like getting out of the internship. It's actually about this being a very important part of the program. Again, another very practical aspect of it. And I'll talk about this later because I think the internship, especially if you're applying for the program to sort of change your career. For instance, there were people who worked in government for a long time and then they wanted to switch into the private sector. Or there were people who worked for NGO for a long time and they wanted to switch to, let's say, I don't know, government sector or something. Your internship, because again, you have the status as a student in an A or B school, this is a great opportunity to actually try yourself in that field and take as many classes and practical experience in that field as possible for you to actually understand, do you like it or do you think you like it? And then another aspect, again, any program has different types of concentrations and specializations, and it's organized very differently in different schools. At SIPA, for instance, having a concentration meant taking 5 3-credit classes, one or two of which should have been like out of the core classes for that concentration. And then specialization is basically taking 3 classes from a particular specialization. So I chose management as a specialization because that was a very broad field at SIPA. You could take quantitative analysis 3 and that would be counted as management specialization. And then for the concentration, it's more specifically about different sort of areas that you can immerse into. So for me, that was urban social policy. At SIPA, we also have economic development policy, I would guess. Again, I'd be mixing up the different concentrations, but basically security policy, international finance, I think, something like that. So again, it's very, very different. And any school will have their variation of how the concentrations and specializations go. At Syracuse, from what I saw on the website, they do have some 8 areas of study. So that means that, again, student can take classes out of that and that would be counted towards their graduation credits. So next, how to apply and finance your education. Again, as I was saying, because we're doing this, again, presentation for EducationUSA, the basic idea is that studying abroad does give you a very different perspective on things. And in general, this usually benefits your experience in many different ways. My personal understanding is that it sort of became a trend of studying abroad, and specifically for, it's good when it's backed up by a specific reason for why you want to study abroad. But I would advise people not to do it if this is just for the sake of saying that you studied abroad. And that's why I think the first thing that you should do if you consider MPA, MPP programs, and for that matter, any program, is to clearly understand the why. So why do you want to have that experience? If we're talking about MPA, why do you want to study for the MPA? Why not MBA? Why not any other degree? And there are tons of them out there. So you have to understand specifically why that degree, because that will be very important once you are applying to the university and you are justifying your motivation to them. And especially important when you're going to be finding the funding for studying abroad. Studying in the US for any program. So understanding the reason you want to study for a specific program is very important. And this is actually a great opportunity to, in general, reflect upon your experience and your life, I would say, to answer that question. Another is why now? Again, as I mentioned, it's usually good to apply once you had at least some experience. Because so much of studying abroad is actually understanding, it's actually reflecting upon some stuff. It's done in the sort of discussions, various practical assignments, and it's very difficult to do this if you have not had a prior experience that you can use to help you solve some problems and in general be part of the discussion in the classroom or outside of it. And then the other thing is, what exactly do you want to study? So understanding specifically why are you going there? Is that because you want to upgrade your quantitative skills, or is that because you want to specifically study, I don't know, the healthcare sector or something like this? So you have to be very specific about this, because this will define first what is the program that you're going to choose and when is the better time for you to actually go and study in the US. So another thing for me is, so whenever people talk about applying for the MPA program, or for that matter, MBA and other programs, I think people wrongfully start with the school. Studying at Harvard has always been my dream, and I just want to study there, and no matter what is the program. That's also it has the right to be as part of the motivation, but I think when you're applying for the MPA program specifically and you have specific things that you want to learn, I think you should start not from the school, but from the program, because it can be the best university in your understanding in the world, like the very famous school, but then the program might not be the one that you actually need. So for instance, in my experience, I applied to various schools. I got into a couple of them. And in the end, my decision was based on the program and on the curriculum. I felt that SIPA had the most flexible curriculum in a way. As you've seen on the previous slide, if you want to study financial management out of those core courses, it's not just one course that you can choose, there are 4 of them. So you can kind of tailor your curriculum to your interests. And I think that was what won that for me. So I would say look at the program and not just the school. But then if school is considered, again, there is different experience of studying in a big city or somewhere in the remote campus. And I think whenever you're considering some of the things that you want to study, it's also important where it is. And I'm not saying that everyone should go and study in New York, but for instance, in my interest, I really wanted to learn about the urban and social policy. And New York is, and I would keep repeating it all the time, is a laboratory of those different issues, some very harsh social and urban issues that the city might face. And I think that having my internship there, doing different sort of practical assignments certainly helped me more than it would be in any other place. And then again, the university itself, the reason why it might differ a lot is, for instance, people who are motivated to, let's say, upgrade their skills in quantitative analysis. I always, from the experience of some of my friends in general, recommend, for instance, Harris School in University of Chicago, because again, the whole university is about economics, is about the quantitative rigor and all that stuff. So whenever you are, the university itself is like this, so you can imagine that even their MPP program is very much about this whole idea and their identity as being the school that is very much about quantitative analysis and economics and stuff. So I think you should consider all of those things whenever you make your decision. So the next stuff is at the stage of the research and preparation for applying to schools, it's very important to speak to alumni and current students, because whatever is written on the website certainly has a place to be there, but you won't learn a lot without talking to people and understanding how it is in practice. The descriptions of different courses can, if the person who is doing it is the right person working there, can write the marvelous descriptions about the courses, but unless you talk to students and the alumni, you won't know whether it's actually the way it is or whether it's not. So it's very much important, because also through this conversations, you learn a lot about the culture of the university and the school, about the different opportunities that are there that you would not necessarily read about on the website. And another thing is talking to school representatives. And here, I think some schools are more open to this than others. That was certainly my experience with Syracuse, for instance, where the head of admission would talk to you, answer all of your questions. Because first, it's important for them to know that you're applying and you're interested in their school and their program. And second, it's very important for you to get some answers from people who are actually working in those universities. If you even have an opportunity to talk to some of the professors there, that's also very valuable, basically any information that you can get. And the other thing is understanding the requirements. So this is very important because, again, some schools, and this kind of is similar to this step about preparing for tests, like some schools have certain requirements and you have to understand whether you meet them or not before you start the very labor-intensive process of applying. Or maybe you might wait for a year to get like that additional experience that school needs, because again, applying to the program is very labor intensive and it's also an investment. So I guess this would be a part about the research and preparation. When it comes to the application, the typical elements of it would be the essays. So essays can be very different. Some schools require a motivation and then specific essay on a public policy problem that you have to reflect upon and write some, I don't know, your thoughts and understanding of it. The essays are very different. From personal experience, if you see any essay that is optional, it is not. You have to write it, because that sort of shows more about your motivation to study at that specific program in universities. And you have to remember that most of this, certainly a lot of the programs that I was applying to, they're very competitive. And you sort of want your application to say that you want to be a part of this program and how you can benefit from it and how the university can benefit from you being part of the class. So essays are very different, start early, especially if you have people who are also applying to a similar program and even the same university. it's good if you do this sort of sharing and I don't know, proofreading, checking each other's essays. Like I would advise this not to be a one-person process. When you just write down, you think that it sounds great, definitely check those essays on other people. You have EducationUSA who has a tremendous experience in those sort of things. So do consult with them, because this is, it might sound to you as if this is a great justification for why you want to be in that university, but you certainly want other people to read it and tell you whether this actually does say what you want it to say. The other part is CVs and resumes. For some of the programs, there is a quantitative resume where you, because again, especially, this is, I think, especially important for those one-year programs that are very intensive. If you have never heard about economics before and never took any classes that are near what you would need to learn and to work on once you are there, it's very difficult for you to catch up, because again, the class is very diverse and people are coming from different sort of backgrounds. So some of the schools do have this quantitative resumes where you explain what sort of exposure did you have to data analysis, economics, and other those kind of quantitative courses and experiences. I think the CV and resume part is a thing that I can talk about for hours, but I think one of the most important things to understand is that your resumes actually speak about your achievements and not your responsibilities at a particular job. So saying that you are sending weekly emails says nothing, because anyone can do this. So you should say exactly what is the impact of anything that you do at your work or at your previous internships. What was the impact of it? Or at least say how you were doing this. Because if you were doing data analysis of, let's say, the data set with, I don't know, 10 variables, that might not be as impressive as to say, like, I was doing it, let's say, stata R and stuff, so that people understand that you sort of have some kind of skills to come with to this specific program. Another part, recommendation letters, I'd say that they're very important, because the process of applying and the whole applications is very different to how some of the things are done in Ukraine. Usually people have to register in the system and submit applications on their own, so you cannot be the one uploading the recommendation letters, and usually they're not even done on paper. You just have to insert some stuff in the system. Usually those are 2-3 recommendation letters. Some of them, some schools require both professional and academic references, so you have to choose people that know a lot about you. And I think usually the idea from a lot of people that I certainly talk to from Ukraine is to, let's say, if you worked at the, I don't know, Ministry of Social Work, let's say, the idea is like, I'll have the minister sign my recommendation letter. And certainly if you did work directly with the minister, and if she agrees to write you that recommendation letter, great. If you have never met the minister, do not try to impress them by signing this, by this being signed by the minister. They're actually interested in people, in your direct supervisors who worked with you, who know about your skills, and who could tell them why you would be a good fit for the program. And in parts of recommendation letters, you have to remember that that's, again, your responsibility. And I would say that recommendation letters should speak about you from different sides. So you have a person, for instance, who knows you in an academic background. So how are you academically prepared to handle the curriculum and the program? So those people should maybe concentrate on that. Some people know you more as like, I was in this internship program abroad, so I know you as an sort of national of another country who came here to learn and do some stuff. So that's another part of you. Another person knows you from a strictly professional background. So those kind of recommendation letters should not all say, Victoria is great. They should say, they should tell specific things about you that the other recommendations would not. And certainly there would be some things that would come up that are similar because those people, those 3-4 people work with you, but they should all tell your story from different sides. And this is, again, your responsibility to communicate to the person that is recommending you. For instance, here, I would really love for you to highlight this project that I did, or the fact that I was initiating something myself. So kind of about my leadership skills and something like that. So that's for you. It's not about writing those recommendation letters about yourself, because people who are very much experienced in this application process, they would see that your essay kind of speaks the same language as your recommendation letter. So that is actually very visible. But again, it is your responsibility to communicate to people what stuff do you want them to highlight based on what you want to say about yourself in that whole application. Another step is, so different sort of tests. There is TOEFL, there is IELTS. Check what schools accept what tests and what is the cutoff score. So usually they do have cutoff score for TOEFL and for IELTS, but not specifically for GRE and GMAT. But then again, check and I know that most of the programs accept GRE, but GMAT, it depends on the program. So be very careful as to what sort of tests you're deciding to take, because again, it costs money and it's very important that it fits the requirements. People ask about how much should you get on your GRE to get into the schools. I think that, again, in most of the programs that I applied to, there were no cutoff scores for GRE and GMAT. Because your application is viewed as a whole. So you can have a top score in GRE, but then if nothing speaks about your motivation or your skills apart from the GRE tests, like your essay is not that great, your resume doesn't really show why you want to study for this specific program, I don't think that they would take a decision to take you just because your GMAT or GRE is great. So that's something to keep in mind. Diplomas and certificates, basically your transcripts, do take care of them early in the process, because in some cases you would need to verify your diploma. In some cases you would need to request the originals from your university here in Ukraine or elsewhere. So that usually takes time. It usually takes, depending on which university you went to in Ukraine, a lot of bureaucratic issues to get that done. So do take care of this in the beginning of your process. Some of the applications include the video, either recording or a live video where you click on this was the case for SIPA, where you click, you get the question, you have to answer it in 1 minute. So that is for them to kind of see you from another side. And some, I think, do have interviews. That was not my case. To all of the schools that I've applied, I didn't have to do the interview, but that may be changing, so check that as well. About the application itself, again, do take time to fill it out and fill it out correctly and fill out everything that you need. The application fee, again, if it weren't for the EducationUSA, I wouldn't know that you can actually ask to waive the fee. So some of the programs do have those application fees that can differ from, for instance, from anywhere from 50 to 100 bucks. So make sure that you actually, again, talk to the universities, explain to them that you would want to waive this application fee, and most of the universities are very much okay with that. So this, again, should not be a problem, and it's something that you can negotiate. I think that's it from the application side. I think I'm seeing something in the chat.
Yeah, someone asked if
diplomas from volunteering to transcripts for application. So the volunteering, again, it depends. If you do have some, usually there is a part where they ask specifically about your education. So if you have some finished, again, either transcripts from a school, if you're still doing some master program or some exchange program somewhere, that is also part of your undergrad or master's degree. But certificates, I mean, do include them maybe in your resume. I don't remember anyone asking for like specific certificates from volunteering, but certainly do include that experience in your resume or your CV, because it shows, it might show again that you're not just doing the working for a specific firm, but you're actually doing something other than your usual work. And transcriptions for application, what do you mean by that?
If you mean transcripts from your university, then yes, you will have to submit all of your transcripts from your undergraduate education.
Yes, okay, cool. So next, financing your education. So I sort of included it as the third step, but actually it should be thought about way in the beginning. A lot of, and I tell this to many people, it's one thing to be accepted to the university, even to your dream university, to the most prestigious university in the world. But then financing that education is a challenge in many cases, and this is something that you should think about early on. So you should understand what are the options out there, what is important for you, and sort of have this on the radar as you're applying. Because I know stories when people apply to their dream university, they couldn't just find money to actually go there. So that's a very, like, it is the third step, because it's actually, okay, you got admitted, that now you are fine, like figuring out your financing, but this is certainly something to think about way in the beginning. The first reason is because, so the options, the university and school ones, usually some schools have a specific time where you can apply to be considered for a merit-based or needs-based scholarships. So do apply before those dates. Usually within the application, you have, for instance, that was the case for SIPA, where they had one of the programs which was called International Fellows Program, and you could apply for like some small stipend for that program within your application to the school itself. So first of all, and like first option, do use any opportunities that you have to apply for the school financing. And again, for that matter, that's why it's very important to talk to alumni, to talk to students who are there right now, to talk to school representatives, because whatever is written on the website, you might not know all of the other options that exist there. And again, it in general helps you plan your budget and understands, for instance, if I can be a teacher assistant, that means that, okay, I potentially can get this amount of money. So for my scholarship, I'm aiming to get this sum of money from the university, something else from the outside scholarships. So this is third step, but certainly do think about it way before you're applying. Other options, think about some of the opportunities within Ukraine. There is I got basically 3 scholarships to study at Columbia. One was the SID grant, which was unfortunately discontinued recently, but we're still hoping that they will be back. The other one was the Worldwide Studies Scholarship from Viktoria Barbaniuk Foundation. So this is an option available in Ukraine, and again, think about this as an option, but you'll have to motivate your decision to go to a specific school to them for sure. Another one was I was a scholarship recipient of the EducationUSA Opportunity Funds program. I think right now, and Nelly, you'll know more, it works a little bit differently. There is Competitive College Club, where you're applying together with other students in the process of applying to different universities. And then I think there is some funding in the end based on some of the requirements. I'm not sure how it works right now, but for me, EducationUSA was a huge help, because that program helped me fund all of the tests like GRE, TOEFL, and send in those transcripts to schools to, I think, that covered the visa expenses and many other, which you would consider small expenses, but then when you add it up, it's actually not a small amount of money. And think about some other scholarship outside of Ukraine. So for some reason, I wrote that Fulbright is outside of Ukraine, but I mean, this is a scholarship that is available in Ukraine. There are people who certainly know more about it, but in Fulbright, from what I know, you first apply to Fulbright and then you apply to the universities. Do consider that option as well. Another one outside of Ukraine, there is World Bank Scholarship, which I think applies to certain people with certain work experience. There is a cut of, I think it's 3 or 4 years, but this is something that you'll have to check out. So do know your options way before you're applying to the university, so that you are not then in the situation where you got to the university, but now you have no idea how to fund your education because either the deadlines for many outside scholarships is over or something like this. So do think about it way in the beginning. So also understand some of the requirements. Some of the scholarships, which was the case of the SIT grant, the worldwide studies from Viktor Barbaniuk Foundation, require you to come back to Ukraine and work in Ukraine for a certain number of years. So again, before you apply there, don't just apply because you want to get the money, but also clearly understand the requirements behind this and be committed to those requirements. One more word about the scholarships within Ukraine, like Pinchuk Foundation and SIT grant. I think one of the most valuable things about getting those scholarships is not, of course, the financing that you get to go to your dream school, but also that you become a part of this community of alumni who came back to Ukraine and who are either working in Ukraine or now somewhere else. And this is certainly a network of people that is very inspiring, and it's very good to be part of this group of people who went through the similar experience, who basically something that you can share with, and who are now working in so many different fields, private, public, nonprofit, and stuff. So that's one of the benefits of scholarships like this one. So about the application form for the scholarship, I think what is most different is the essay and the budget. So the essay, of course, you have to motivate why did you want to go for, again, MBA program, why specific university. But I think another thing is for them specifically for those kind of, and I'm talking from my experience of SIT grant and Pinchuk Foundation scholarship, is to understand specifically and explain to them why do you want to study this specific program, why in this specific university, and how are you planning to apply the knowledge that you will get there back when you're in Ukraine, and certainly understand why you should be the one funded, because as you can imagine, there are a lot of people applying for those kind of scholarships. So you have to stand out and clearly explain why the scholarship is important for you. I think, yeah, similar to the budget. So this is again something to think about way in the beginning of applying to the school, because one of the differences is that you will have to present a budget. You will have to clearly understand how much money would you need to fund your education. And this is not just the tuition, but also the everything connected with the living expenses, because for those scholarships, it is important to understand that if they give you a scholarship, you can actually find the rest of the money to finance your education. So this is something to think about, and this is certainly what's going to be part for those sort of applications. And I think another part is the interview. Usually those scholarships do have in-person, I mean, now it might not be in person, but interviews where you have to clearly defend, again, why MPA, why now, why you, why the specific university or program, how you're going to find it, how are you thinking of applying this knowledge back in Ukraine. So any sort of that stuff, you should be able and prepared to defend, because no one is going to give you a scholarship just because you got into Columbia. You have to, they will give you a scholarship if they understand that you have the motivation, you have a clear vision of what you're going to do afterwards, and in general, you can back up your motivation during the interview. Okay, and so if you went through all of this process and everything is very successful, similar to these pictures, you got to your dream university. This is a picture of our class in September 2017. I'm somewhere here in the picture. So we had a very huge class. It was more than 500 people. Again, they studied on different programs. But I think that's, again, if you went through everything successfully, that's what you got in the beginning. So I think another stuff that I wanted to mention today is, so obviously when you got to your dream university, you got a chance to study the stuff that you wanted to study, but there is so much more to that experience. And I think it's very important, if you are investing a year or 2 years of your life into this program, money-wise and time-wise, you have to get the best out of this experience. And here are some, sorry, I see the chat. Study, it's more important considering country. Okay, is this realistic to bring in dependents to be with you for the time of study? Interesting question. I was not in that situation when I had to. It depends. I think there are some programs that even fund your dependents in some way or another, which would be the Fulbright program. I mean, I think it's realistic, but you have to understand that there are some certain financial things that come into force if there is more than just you going to study there. So, I mean, realistic in terms of if you make it realistic, it is, but I'm not sure that I can answer that because that was certainly not my experience. There was another one. Yep, it is even more important considering falling income rates across the region.
Referring to finding financing.
Okay, yeah, makes sense. Yes, so once you're there, the important stuff, part of SIPA was this abundance of various student organizations. And I think it's very important, again, if you consider this experience, and for me, it was very important to participate in that sort of stuff. You don't want to just study. I mean, that was certainly my understanding. You don't want to just study there and get the knowledge that you want to get, which is you'll inevitably do if this is why you went there. But I think you also want to get more out of that experience. So for me, that was participation in the many student groups that SIPA has, because this sort of allow you to exercise your creativity, again, work with different people. It's completely volunteer-based. So it's sort of an interesting experience managing a team. I was the president of the student group, so this is all competitive based. You have elections and that sort of stuff. And then you, for instance, manage people who, me with my 2 years of experience coming into SIPA, and then, I don't know, someone with like 5-8 years of experience working for the Ministry of Education of Peru. So that's sort of a very different experience where you get those managerial and teamwork experience, not only through classes, but through actually doing it in real life. So I was part of the Education Collaborative Student Group. It was sort of a challenge because you have to apply, you have to go through the elections. I think I was always more comfortable in the roles where I could be on the back, supporting the team and doing my part of work, but then certainly applying to be a president of the group was a bit of a challenge, but it was totally worth it because you have a chance. Always you say like, oh, you know, like this could have been done better or something like this. So that's the situation where like you think it could be done better, then go ahead and do it. So that was a very interesting experience. We did, I applied for the Education Collaborative Student Group because sort of when I was at SIPA, my focus from education switched more to urban policy, housing, urban development, that sort of stuff. So I wanted to keep part of what I has always been passionate about with me. So I was part of this education group. We did a lot of interesting stuff, like the trips to Harlem Children's Zone, which is this unique educational organization within 100 blocks in Harlem in New York. So that was an inspiring stuff. Having worked at Teach for Ukraine, I brought Larisa Hovhannisyan, who is the CEO of Teach for Armenia, when she was in New York. And I think one of the events that I'm most proud of is we organized the event with the Director for Education at the World Bank, Jaime Saavedra, who was previously also the Minister for Education in Peru. So this is my team. Those were amazing individuals to work with. Again, we were all from so many different countries and backgrounds. You have India, Peru, Taiwan. This was a huge experience, and I hugely encourage everyone to don't just take economics and quantitative analysis out of this. I think step out of they say comfort zone and stuff, and do try out something else, because that's the time when, as a student, you have more time and not more time, that's not maybe true, but like you have more opportunities to do something that you would otherwise not do. So this is the fun stuff, the cool cats. So basically the idea of SIPA is when you get through the orientation, because there were, again, like more than 500 students in the class, they divide you into different groups. So during orientation, you speak to those people, you have time to, again, connect to some group of people instead of like an always changing group of faces and stuff. So mine was, I was assigned to the SIPL's group C. SIPL is the name for a person who studies at SIPA. And that's certainly a very, a good experience to connect to folks from different walks of life, and do use this opportunity to make friendships and stuff, because this is part of this experience for sure. Another advice is getting involved into different sort of programs, challenges that your school would certainly have. So at Columbia, they have the design studio, which is basically all of the stuff that you've ever heard about design thinking and design thinking consulting kind of stuff. This is what they have at Columbia as well. So one year, one of the professors from the school organized this EdTech design challenge. So the idea was that we were assigned to you were selected on a competitive basis from all of the schools at Columbia, Business School, Teachers College, SIPA, and all of the other faculties and schools. And basically the idea was that you would consult a client going through this design thinking process to solve some kind of a problem. So ours was in Brazil. We were assigned 3 different clients: Khan Academy, Nova Escola, and other client. And you work in a group of 5 people to solve some kind of again, challenge that they are facing. That is certainly a very different experience. Sometimes it feels like it's outside of the classroom and you have so many other problem sets to deal with and other assignments, but that's certainly that you remember the most once you graduate. So I encourage everyone, if you do have any sort of, again, like challenges and different competitions that they would have as part of the public policy, public administration school, do take part in them, because they are very, it's a very enriching experience. The other stuff is internship. So as I mentioned, if you do want to study something a little bit different from what you did back in Ukraine or in other countries where you lived and worked at, and do take your internship seriously in a way that do try to go to that sector where you've never worked before. So my story was that I took this class on housing policy, which was taught by Sarah Watson, who is the deputy director of this organization that I entered in. And another one was Geraldine Perrine here in the picture. She was the housing commissioner under Giuliani and Bloomberg back when they were mayors of New York. And this class changed a lot because I think I never knew that housing could be a very specific policy field separate from anything else. I think partially because in Ukraine, it's not very much distinct. It's usually in like bundled together with other policy fields. And so out of that, again, this is the stories of performing in the class is important, especially because it can get you a summer internship or a job. So then I was invited to join the Citizens Housing and Planning Council for the internship. We did a bunch of interesting events, and I think one of the main accomplishment is this green stuff that you can see here is that I did the study on shared housing, and that was later took by the government of New York to pilot one of the programs. So that's a very interesting experience, and I do advise you not just to take internship for the sake of taking the internship, but to actually get the most out of this experience. And again, if you are switching careers, do try yourself in that specific field to see if you like it or not. And in general, just to get a more rounded experience than just it. So yeah, and then after all of this stuff is completed, you get the sweet reward of graduation day. Unfortunately, because of the COVID-19, so many colleges do not have graduations this year, which is, again, in a way sad, but in a way understandable. But yes, I think I was proud because that year, that was the only Ukrainian flag in the audience. So at SIPA, we have this wonderful tradition where everyone carries the flag of the country they are from or the country that they feel represent their identity. So, I mean, graduation is sweet, enjoy it because it goes by very fast, and but that's a very enriching experience. And so after you go back, you will most likely, again, given the MPA degree, you will work in different sort of careers. After I finished SIPA, I came back to Ukraine and joined CIVITTA, which is one of the leading management consulting firms in Central and Eastern Europe. Again, here you have the opportunity to work on all of those sort of private, public, nonprofit kind of challenges, and consulting in general is very fun. One of the partners at our firm asked me to mention it today that we are recruiting. So if you're interested to join CIVITTA as well, this is a very fun experience. Do let me know. But yeah, but basically the idea is that when you do come back, it is not an easy period because you do have the adjustment to make from being 2 years somewhere else, but hopefully in the company or in the organization that sort of embodies all of the values that you learned while being there, it's a fun time, you know, to work for a firm like this. So yes, I think that's it from my side. We can switch to Q&A, and if anything, I'll send this email into the chat, so feel free to let me know, and if you need any help with your application or in general understanding.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, Victoria. It's so nice to hear from a firsthand experience about what to do, what not to do, and all those things. So we have about 5 minutes for Q&A before we need to prepare for our next event at 6:30. But if you have questions, please type them into the chat box, type them into the Q&A box, or raise your hand if you'd like to ask your question vocally. Fantastic. Sid
Grant, I'm not sure. You'll have to contact them. I'm not sure if they will be working in 2021. There is certainly a hope, but I'm not sure. I'm an American graduate student and with EducationUSA, and like consulting is a large sector that MPA go into, and I was hoping you could go just with this type of position. For example, what's your number one concern on it? In this role, what are some general things to emphasize on your resume? Thank you. So what do you mean? You mean, is it more about what it is like to work in consulting, or you work in consulting right now and you're planning to apply to school, so you are wondering what is the things that you should highlight in your CV? It's more of the environment of consulting. I mean, I'd like to say that consulting is the environment of it is basically that you work on different sort of challenges. Today you work on the, I don't know, healthcare waste management project. Tomorrow you work on the transportation project. The day after that you work on agro sector projects. So you have to be very adjustable. So hopefully the skills that you do get in your MPA and PP degree are the ones that are transferable across sectors. So that allows you to get deeper into the topic very fast, but at the same time, the set of skills that you have is very much transferable across different sectors, be it agro, I don't know, healthcare, urban policy, whatever. It is a very broad field, but I think the most important skills to have would be the problem solving, being receptive to feedback, and then in general, more of a project managing, because you basically can work on multiple projects at the same time or have different tasks that you'll have to complete. So you kind of have to keep track of everything and have a big picture view on the things that you do, what's more of a priority today, what's less of a priority. And then another thing is communication skills, because in the end, you do have to communicate with your team members, with the client. Clients can be very different. Public, private, nonprofit sectors all are very different. Or for instance, the beneficiaries, when the beneficiary is not the client itself. So then it's basically being able to communicate with people from different backgrounds, which I think also what MPA degree teaches you a lot.
We had another question in the chat box about age limits, and I can say about pretty much any degree in the U.S. at an American university, there's no. I'm assuming you're asking about a maximum age limit. As long as you can show your motivation for study and your readiness to take that on, there's no age limit. But Victoria mentioned sort of looking at, they usually post average ages of their students for their program, so that just might be something to consider. You know, if you are on the older end of the spectrum and the average age of their students is 22, you know, just think about if you're ready to be in that kind of environment, or if you would look at a program that has maybe some older students.
Yeah, and at the same time, consider that some of the MPA and PP programs do have, some of the universities, most of them actually have executive MPA programs. So if you have like 10 years of experience, there are different sort of programs also that exist out there that basically have the same curriculum, but then it's more for like executives who had a huge experience. But if you're asking on the like lower side of the of this like age limits and stuff, again, there is no discrimination against age, but it's more about the work experience. And usually people in the admissions know how much you can get out of the program, you know, if you don't have any experiences or sort of that stuff. So I don't think that there is any discrimination about this. Is the Ukrainian government interested in workers that have education in the US or other countries? I mean, I think it's certainly an asset. I would just say that I think it would be a very false idea to come back to Ukraine, which, let's say, the degree from Columbia University, and hope that anyone is going to give you a job. What I usually say is that this type of degree and this type of experience will get you an interview, but then in the end, getting a job is sort of your task to demonstrate the skills and the understanding of the work that you're going to do. So I would say that it's certainly an asset, but at the same time, again, don't be falsely misled that it's going to open any doors in front of you. It's the skills and your knowledge that you will bring from that degree, and not the name of the university or the fact that you studied in the US, that's going to get you a job. Okay.
Fantastic. Last call for questions. I can also add that We have also had speakers from the Worldwide Studies Program and Fulbright do webinars with us, and you can find those recordings on our YouTube channel. Just search Education USA Ukraine on YouTube if you want to find out more about those that Victoria mentioned. And the recording of this lecture will be on our YouTube channel as well if you'd like to refer to it at a later date. Victoria also mentioned the Opportunity Funds Program, and I just wanted to speak about that again a moment. She mentioned that we have our competitive college club, and then if you're a member of the competitive college club, you can apply to be awarded an opportunity funds grant, and that helps cover the cost of admission. So not the cost of studying in the US, but the cost of admission, like taking those tests, visa costs, and everything else that Victoria mentioned. All right, thank you so much, Victoria, for taking the time to answer all those questions and so thoroughly go through the information. Can you send that to all panelists and attendees? Because I think only I can see this.
Oh, okay, got it.
So Victoria's putting her email address in the chat box if you have any questions and want to follow up with her.
Okay, I think I sent it to attendees. I think it's sent to attendees. I don't know if everyone can see it. But basically, yes, Victoria at Barbaniuk@columbia.edu. Feel free to let me know if you have any questions, because I think it took more time to go over the presentation than to take questions. So hopefully if you have any other questions, I could answer them after this.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Victoria. And if you have any questions about studying the US in general, please feel free to check out our website, Education USA. Thank you again, Victoria, and feel free to reach out to her if you have any follow-up questions.
Thanks for having me, and good luck to anyone applying.
Yeah, thanks everyone. All right, have a good evening.